So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Great Data Debate. Really good to have you all here. In order to get going, I want to introduce just to the executives that we have on the panel here. My esteemed panel, thank you all for coming, who've come from across the world. So, let's go in. I'll go in first of all with Bar. Bar Moses is CEO and co-founder of Monte Carlo, which is a data reliability and data observability company. She is the founder of the data observability category, and is previously VP of customer operations at customer success company called Gainsight, where she helped the company scale to 10 times its revenue, and has, amongst other things, built the data analytics team there. And prior to that, she was a management consultant at Bain & Company, a research assistant at Stanford University in statistics, and also a commander in the Israeli Air Force, an intelligence data analyst unit. She graduated from Stanford with a BSc in mathematical and computer science. Welcome, Bar. Thanks for coming along.
It's great to be here.
Secondly, I'd like to introduce Robin Sutara. We're doing ladies first here. So Robin is Chief Technology Officer of EMEA. She's gone from repairing Apache helicopters. Is that a new Apache project? I didn't know that. Okay.
Apache Spark, Apache helicopters.
Apache helicopters in the Korean demilitarized zone to the corporate battlefield. She's demonstrated navigating high-stress situations. There's nothing more high-stress than that, I would guess. And she's consulted with hundreds of organizations on data strategy, data culture, and building diverse teams. She's got an eclectic career path in technical and business functions with more than 20 years in tech companies, including Microsoft and Databricks, and has achieved multiple academic accomplishments from an undergraduate to Juris Doctorate to a master's in engineering. So welcome, Robin. Thirdly, Jitesh Ghai is Executive Vice President and Chief Product Officer of Informatica. Welcome, Jitesh.
Pleasure.
He leads the product management, user experience design, engineering, and cloud operations with a customer-centric approach. At Informatica, he began his career at Informatica as VP of Product Management and defining the overall vision and strategy for operational data integration, big data, and IoT. And prior to that, Jitesh served in various leadership roles in engineering and sales and product management at Cisco, Solace, and 29 West, and has a bachelor's in applied science and a first-class honors in electrical engineering from University of Waterloo in Canada. Oh, in Ontario. I used to live there. I lived in Toronto for a while.
Excellent spot. Highly recommended. In the summers.
Okay. And last but not least, all the way from Luxembourg, Andrei Zaychikov is CTO for EMEA on data and analytics at Microsoft. So has 15 years experience in designing highly secure distributed systems on a massive scale, and has proven track record in implementing and defining data strategies. He's successfully operationalized those in a number of multinational companies and has extensive experience in multiple cloud platforms, and including obviously Azure, AWS, and GCP, and a strong foundation in security principles. His true passion is designing leading edge distributed secure systems. So welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
Andre. So let's get going. We're in a tough economy right now. We've had some pretty doomy, gloomy suggestions or recommendations and forecasts from people like the IMF saying, the economy shrunk over a percentage point, 1.5 percentage points, potentially even predicted to go lower than that. We've had inflation running high. A lot of businesses have been tightening their belts. So I'm just kind of curious that now that we're in a slow world economy, whether people are looking at seeing costs rising, and what would you say your customers, or have they changed their priorities in the area of data and analytics? I mean, Do you see anything there as it sort of stalled movement to the cloud? Is it stalled headcount? Is it, is there cost reduction going on? Is there anything that you're being pressurized on or seeing your customers, handling with regards to the current economy at the moment?
I can start.
We're all very polite. Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to start.
I'll volunteer, Jitesh.
I said I passed over the hard questions to Jitesh, so I'm going to keep that card for later.
That was a softball.
That was a softball. So I think, looking at sort of the last sort of decade or decade and a half, it's been an interesting time for data, right? Like with sort of the pandemic, with COVID, it ushered in this digital transformation, moved to the cloud. Companies rushed to, gather as much data as they could. That, really did this push to the cloud. And one of the things that happened as a result is a lot of folks spent a lot of money on data infrastructure and data teams and grew significantly the data organizations as they needed to support that transformation. In a sense, I think data teams actually sort of broke a record to be the first organizations to build 8-figure budgets with very little oversight. That was sort of the last 2 to 3 years, I want to say. And obviously now we're seeing a correction to that, and I think there's actually a lot of positives to that correction. So we're seeing spend that's more thoughtful, and we're seeing a lot of customers that, if before you could have very, very quickly spun up a tech stack overnight, maybe within a couple of days, people now actually have to prove ROI. And obviously that's a higher bar for partners and for vendors, but I think that's a feature, that's not a bug. That's awesome. We should work harder to prove ROI.
People want to see ROI, right, at the end of the day. So what you're kind of saying is there's much more focus on that in order to deliver value, because probably they're seeing pressure from above anyways, right?
100%. Right. Time to value matters more than ever. Automation, efficiency, I think that's sort of the word of the day, and I think it's for a good cause. It's actually forces everyone to be better, and data teams are improving and figuring out how are they tied to the business, how are they driving revenue for organizations. We're just speaking with OVO Energy earlier today, and they actually tie how the work of the data team impacts sort of carbon reduction and smart meters, and actually increased efficiency for citizens. And that's an amazing ability to tie the work of data teams to actual real impact in the world.
But Jitesh, you bet that, Informatica have kind of bet the company on the cloud with IDMC. I mean, are you seeing this, a slowdown as people move over there because of this? Or are they just saying, well, let's just keep our data on-prem and we'll work on it there?
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. It's I like the thoughtful word. I don't think of it as a reduction in spend as much as greater emphasis on connecting to business outcomes versus just picking a tool and doing something. The definition of return of investment or time to value, the definition of value is not just loading some data into some analytics platform. Right. It's loading some data into some analytics platform and the resulting analysis resulting in a business outcome and impact. I will say, not all geographies are created equal. Middle East, as an example, is flourishing. The amount of investment in digital is immense. You look at Saudi Airlines, you look at the Abu Dhabi Digital Authority, they're transforming the entire region with an immense amount of investment in digital. So there's that. Having said that, I will agree, I would say the last couple of quarters of 22, the first half of this year, there's been a lot of caution in spend. There has been some tightening with regards to greater discipline in your compute and how you use your compute. Yeah. But with data and specifically digital initiatives, be it analytics or otherwise, you can only kick the can down for so long before you have to do it. It's too mission critical.
Sure. But talking about data engineering, I mean, all of you in a way have got data engineering, obviously Informatica and Microsoft. You have the ETL platform on Databricks as well, able to do stuff there. And you're plugged into it all, kind of monitoring it, right? But given that there's almost everybody doing data engineering, last year it was data mesh here. That was the hottest thing in town last year. This year it's generative AI, but last year was data mesh. And that's kind of all about democratizing data engineering. So we've got everybody doing data engineering, you know, from IT professionals, citizen data engineers, data science, everybody's at it. And we're moving towards like consumption-based pricing. And in a tight economy, I mean, like, I'm trying to figure out how the heck does CFOs get their head around the cost of data engineering in their enterprise? I mean, what are you guys doing to kind of help with that? You know, because, I mean, with so many tools out there and people doing this, it seems to me like they're blind to what the actual cost of this might be to an organization. Is there anything you're doing to try and help with that?
Yeah, I'll take this one. From an Informatica perspective, central to why customers rely on us is that we're independent and neutral. So we will partner deeply with Databricks, with Microsoft and other hyperscalers because we recognize that the data and analytics and digital landscape will always be fragmented. There is no one data lake for everything. There is no one SaaS app for everything. You know, there's multiple systems of record, multiple use cases, multiple departments, and fragmentation. But the last thing you want is your data management to be fragmented. The last thing you want is to spend energy stitching together your integration, your quality, your master data management, catalog governance, etc. What that affords us is a unique view into how organizations deploy their workloads, how those workloads are deployed on Fabric or on Delta or Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift, etc. What kind of ELTs are deployed on them, what kind of compute on a per job basis. Our FinOps capability will enable administrators to understand on a per job basis exactly how much they're consuming, right, and on which platforms they're consuming it. In this thoughtful environment of budget and spend, you know, we sit as the Switzerland giving that insight to CFOs and other budget holders.
Okay, all right. So FinOps, I think, is are you bringing that out in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something here, right? So basically, to just imagine, right? There are tons of organizations out there which have like thousands of systems, right, deployed in production, right? And for them, they're already controlling the costs, let's say, virtually, somehow, right? And when they're moving to the different set of the technologies and expanding to the cloud, let's say, right? What actually happens is that they're losing some of these practices they already have built for the control in the budgets, right? For the control in the spend and all. But what really happens is that when moving to the cloud and moving kind of to the newer platforms and systems, you can introduce, and it's a little bit less than technology, it's more like a cultural and process side, right? Companies are introducing the optimization cycles, the constant optimization cycles. So they're taking the baselines, which they have, and normally that's how they do that, right? Initially they're comparing with what they already have. And then they're working from there in terms of the optimizations. And these optimizations are coming not only from the compute, but generally from removing redundancies, let's say. Not only storage, not only compute, but redundancies in processes and apps and so on and so forth, right? So, and for CFOs, it's not the easy task to accomplish, right? And not that easy to understand how that works, but taking the baseline they already had and moving from there, optimizing from there gives some good results, actually.
I think there's a difference, though, from moving from CapEx to OpEx, right, as you think about moving from on-prem to the cloud. But I have to admit, I think ChatGPT threw a wrench in all of that, right? Like, organizations really were thinking about how do we minimize our spend post-pandemic. We see the recession coming. We need to drive savings, whether it's in process or technology or whatever that might be. Then all of a sudden, ChatGPT hit, and oh my gosh, every organization now said, let's throw more money into this thing because we need to be AI-driven. I mean, I almost on a daily basis have conversations with CEOs and boards who are now saying, I don't care now. Yes, we told you to cut costs around your OpEx because we're paying on a subscription basis. However, deliver an AI solution tomorrow. And now all of us are saying, oh my gosh, you're not ready for that yet. You don't have the foundations in place. We're barely in the cloud. right? You told me to stop spending on OpEx and to, and to think about our CapEx investments that we still have. And so I think it's a really interesting point in time, but I actually don't see it slowing. I think that generative AI kick
and I
that
think that
everybody's
kind of
talking
agrees
about,
with what I said in the opening session this morning, that most of the companies I'm serving are increasing their overall investment
Absolutely.
in data and AI.
And just to build on that, I think you're absolutely right. For example, I think the questions that CFOs are asking are not so much how do we reduce spend on Gen AI, but how do we build a Gen AI use case or product that actually delivers value.
I don't want to go to Gen AI right now.
We had to.
No, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Everybody else is talking about it.
Let's go. Let's go over to talk about something that I talked this morning about, a data and analytics foundation, because it's now the case that data and AI is pretty well every part of the business wanting it. Where it used to be in the old days, it was marketing or it was finance that were the key sponsors of all of this kind of stuff. And now it's everywhere, every aspect of business. And you saw that from the snippet I put up this morning when I opened the show, that executives are really bullish about all of this. But the last decade has been a frenzy. It reminded me of what this place looked like last night at 8 o'clock, when there was just stuff all over the floor, and we still had to get it right for today. So we've had all of these projects come and go, and there's been a lot of different technologies used. But do you sort of sense now that companies are looking to rationalize the tools they have to get a more integrated platform, or do you still think that best of breed rules? I mean, is it just buy whatever tools you want and go do this, or do you think that integrated tools is the name of the game as part of a data foundation these days?
I think it's a rationalization of build versus buy is what I'm seeing a lot of, right? Organizations are trying to figure out what is the rationalized that is best of breed for what we're trying to deliver within those specific use cases and the specific business values that we're looking to drive as an outcome. But I do think organizations are willing to go outside of that standard if it's going to drive a clear return on the investment for making that. And so I don't know that it's an absolute that organizations are saying we will.
So they're prepared to spend outside of that if there's innovation and opportunity, business opportunity that would come from it.
Absolutely.
But you generally see them. I mean, that's why this morning I said, well, it's kind of like single vendor data fabric versus the modern data stack. You got best of breed vendors now starting to integrate their tools to try and compete with sort of single stack vendors trying to go end to end.
But everybody's driving toward open standards anyway, right? I mean, if I think about some of the announcements that we've made.
I've got things to ask about open standards. There are some standards that aren't being adopted at all yet, and I've been asking it every year for the last 5 years on this panel.
I think, Mike, on the rationalization standpoint, it's not rationalization for the sake of rationalization. There's a immense utility in economic cycles. There's the growth at all costs, and then there's we built some bad habits along the way. We've got some tech debt, some infrastructure bloat. We've got some, people, process, role, responsibility challenges and who's doing what with data. And that's really what is being looked at thoughtfully. That's what offers an opportunity of, I don't need to give an insight tomorrow. I should use this opportunity to enable organizations with the right platforms to be more productive versus cobbling together multiple bespoke tools. The key is to be able to start small, but with the commitment that you can scale and deliver to mission critical workloads. That's been part of the challenge when cobbling together tools. That's why organizations look to Informatica is for the breadth as well as the depth of capability.
Right.
And maybe just to give a practical example, I was speaking with a Fortune 500 CIO not too long ago, and she mentioned that they have 25,000 applications. 25,000. Think about that, like the number of apps per employee. That's perhaps unreasonable. And so I think looking from that perspective, perhaps there's room to consolidate that, to rationalize that. But I do think alongside that, people still want the best solution for the problems that they have. So I think for me, it's a yes and. You want best of breed for real problems, but you don't want to have so many applications it doesn't make sense.
Let me ask the audience just quickly, a show of hands. How many of you are rationalizing technologies, perhaps to get tools to work together better rather than just go out and buy best-of-breed tools? How many are looking at rationalization here? What about best-of-breed? How many of you are still best-of-breed? Okay, so nobody putting that one up. So I guess the rest of you don't know, perhaps. But all right, so thank you for that.
You know, I do want to emphasize, it's not A or B.
No, I get that.
Just because you're rationalizing doesn't mean you're not getting best of breed.
Oh, 100%.
You know, we're a data management
I guess the point I'm
platform.
making, one of the things I put on the panel, on the opening session this morning, is that for the first time in 5 years, the survey showed companies saying technology limitations were an issue, right? Now, you'd think technology advances every year, but when I probed into that, turns out it's because tools are not working together and they're not getting jobs done fast enough, right? And so that's what I mean, is like I want joined up tooling rather than a lot of random tools that don't work together.
It's actually a little more exciting than that. I think what's exciting in the space of data and analytics is the definition of minimum viable has changed. In data management, it's not acceptable to just be an ingestion framework or a bespoke ELT offering. Data-driven organizations, definitely the more mature ones, realize that data management needs to be a platform as well. So minimum viable is not just doing one small thing, but being integrated and being able to do the breadth and depth of it.
But I think there is one more point,
Okay.
right? Bart, to your example, right? And I'm working with similar organizations, right? 25,000 applications. You cannot just rationalize all of that. We are not in the world where we are just throwing consultants in, analyzing them throughout like each and every application. No, we cannot do that, right? However, we have a lot of people inside the companies who know the application, who know what they're doing, who have their own technical depth, who have their own things they were planning to achieve, right? And this can be achieved via the processes, via introducing the proper culture of working with data, and via introducing the proper foundation as well, right?
All right. Let's stick with this data foundation for a minute. I mean, obviously, last year, again, Data Mesh talked about the whole idea of democratizing everything. I mean, are you seeing amongst your customers that that's now the case, that we are decentralizing development pretty well across the board? I mean, what are you seeing your customers doing here? I mean, is there some kind of organization to kind of coordinate all of these projects going on around the enterprise, that they're trying to kind of pull all these things together? Or is it just everybody just doing random projects around the enterprise? I mean, how do you is organization a big deal now in terms of this data and analytics foundation, do you think?
Yes. So if I may just start, and you guys can feel free to add, right? So we started like some of the data mesh projects, we started with our customers over the 4 years back, right? So they were the first data mesh projects. At that moment in time, there was no word for data mesh, right? But there was a clear need to make data a commodity, to turn data into commodity, right? And there are successful and unsuccessful organizations. The successful organizations, they are having, let's say, the general consensus across the major line of businesses and across the major technology owners, and then building on top of this consensus, because the foundation for this consensus is the data foundational platform, the boring stuff, right? The data governance, all sort of these boring things. However, if there is a just central organization which kind of tries to consume all of this data engineering work, it normally fails, regardless of how high the sponsors are sitting. Even we had some cases where the board was directly sponsoring such efforts, and after like 2-3 years, it kind of failed, and all the risks were signed off. Right? So again, it's less about the let's say, having or not having the central organization. It's more on having the culture, general consensus, and the proper processes in place, right? Rather than just the technology. And that's why I think over the last few years, there was a general consensus achieved that data mesh is not the technology, it is methodology, right?
All right, but then one of the things I keep seeing in my analyst calls is that IT, the leaders are pushing IT into the different teams. So rather than them sitting center, they're actually forcing their IT expertise into those teams to try and upskill them so they can get more people skilled across the organization and adopting best practices. And so that's been a big significant change. You know, the fact that IT is moving, at least in some of my, what I would call leading edge customers, that's what they're doing. They are acknowledging the fact that it is decentralized development, but trying to put in place a program office, trying to put in place decentralized expertise to try and upskill everybody and get everybody moving on best practices.
So to your question, first, yes, whether you're one of the largest truck manufacturers in the world or the largest vaccine developers in the world, data products is a thing. Building data products that can then be democratized and consumed across lines of business is a definite thing.
Yes.
Whether it fully adheres to data mesh principles or partially adheres to them, very much so. To do that, yes, you do need to enable the business to self-serve. It's not federating IT from a phones and laptops perspective as much as from a, you weren't saying that, I'm just clarifying that it's from a data perspective.
Right.
And that's where what we often see is organizations pick an enterprise standard for analytics, or a lakehouse, or a fabric, as well as us for data management, and serve as a center of excellence to support the federated development teams that are building data products. So that's very much a thing that is now helping with the success of some early adopters of the data mesh data product concept. I will say, there is a people process element to this that requires a major mindset shift. A data product is a product. If it's a product, it needs product managers. It needs to not just be built once and forgotten, thrown over the fence. It now it needs to be adhered to a product lifecycle management.
Right.
So you need to know your TAM. You need to know your addressable market within the organization of this data product. You need to know who your customers are. You need to build it, and then you need to maintain it. You need to enhance it. You need to have releases. That's a big change, right? If people are talking data products and they're not talking data product managers, that's a gap. That's when you see the kinds of things that Andre just mentioned.
Right. Okay.
I would just say, I think it's about damn time we do that. Like, it's been a while that we've been collecting data, sitting on data, aggregating, transforming data. Yeah, it's about time that a lot more people in the company use data, and I think some of the most innovative company, like Whatnot, is like a fast-growing e-commerce company. They're going to have almost the entire company, more than half, actually use the data warehouse directly. And I think that's where we should be heading. So 100% agree.
Well, what about data?
Just
let's
one
move on.
last
'Cause
remark. Sorry for that. Yeah, but
I have lots of opinions.
yeah, just one last remark here. The problem, not the problem, but challenge with the data products is that it becomes the point of consensus between the different groups within and different stakeholders within the organization. Otherwise, what will happen, we're going to go back to the previous paradigm, where each and every LOB, each and every owner will build their own data products. And this point where people should reach consensus for the greater good, let's say, right? That's the major shift in the culture.
Well, that really requires coordination across multiple teams as well.
Exactly.
All right, let's move to data governance. We're now dealing with, or most people are dealing with a distributed data estate. They've got data in SaaS applications, they've got data in data stores in multiple clouds, I've got data in data stores on premises, I've got data streaming in from the edge on a whole range of IoT devices or financial markets data or whatever, right? So we're dealing with a pretty distributed data estate with even more data sources popping up all over the place. And, it seems to me, that data governance has expanded. When I first started talking on data governance conferences, it was just about data quality. And in 2017, GDPR happened. Then it went to privacy. Then it went to access security. Then it's retention. Now it's sharing. The whole thing is just snowballed into a much bigger problem. And I think companies are really struggling with this. I have a case in point where I had a situation with an organization had ended up buying 6 different catalogs. right, across their global business, and are now trying to figure out the catalog of catalogs problem. So it seems to me with a multitude of technologies and a distributed data landscape, this is a real issue. And now we've got AI governance in on the mix, and I said on the opening session this morning, 6% of global revenue is what the EU is going to penalize. It's even more than GDPR, which is kind of scary. But we'll get to AI governance in a second. But I mean, do you not think with all of this stuff out there and people ending up with multiple catalogs, there needs to be some kind of thing above all of that, like a federated governance approach to kind of get control of this? I mean, what would you say is the answer? I mean,
I think organizations, when they can't figure out where something exists for data or where it should be owned by data, it goes to governance, right? They just categorize it in the governance bucket and say, figure it out, right? So I've seen lots of organizations start to think about, do we think about this distributed steer code type of model where we think about governance and we bring the stakeholders and the business owners in and we reach a consensus on what that looks like. But I've seen other organizations say, no, we're going to have a centralized data management office and they're going to own all of these different components. I think depending on the maturity of the organization and the willingness to actually implement change across technology, people, and process, until you have that centralized control where they have the power and the authority to drive that type of operational change, which I think is novel. Like many organizations still struggle with this overlap between technology, the CIO, and information, which is separate from the CTO and the technology stack, along with the chief data officer, chief digital officer, security officer, and all of those components feed up into governance. Until you have an organization that actually, where you've defined the span of control for your DMO, I think a centralized model is destined to fail.
Destined to fail, right.
I kind of look at it as there's two elements to governance. There's if you do not comply, there's penalties. That's
Sure.
the stick or the defensive element. There's also the offensive element
100%.
where you implement just enough guardrails so that people can consume data with confidence, so that there's just enough transparency to understand quality, to understand trust, and whether a data product is fit for use for a particular use case. Very different from regulatory compliance. It's not, the G word, everybody's, well, we're going to lock this down. You're not going to be able to use it or only for this purpose. No, it's more about enabling data consumption. To democratize data, you have to govern data, but just enough governance.
Right.
But I think people are afraid of the regulatory and all of those other issues
But like
that we leaned toward this complete lockdown, right? Which is now why organizations are still struggling with data silos and not being able to democratize access to the data because they opted toward the
But now we have
most
data
secure.
catalogs, we can do automatic data discovery, we can do automatic data classification, we can map it to business glossaries, so we can see all of that. So we understand different classifiers of data out there. We can
But
create...
that doesn't mean that you're willing to take the risk to open up the data, which then causes the stagnation in the
Right.
organization.
Because I mean, even in Purview, I can create policies in Purview and all of that, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing this in the technologies to be able to do this across a distributed landscape.
But if you will take a look at the whole picture, right, to your point, Robin, basically, one thing is to see what is within the data, right? We have nice and shiny data products. We're able to catalog all good, right? We're able to put the labels on top of that. However, the real data democratization, what it requires to change the access model. And it falls into the domain of CISO, right? As CISO, and that's what I'm telling sometimes to my customers, if you want really to democratize your data, you start with change of the access model within the enterprise. And that's not something which will happen easily.
No, but I mean, on a governance perspective, I mean, companies are obligated. We're seeing more and more legislation emerging right across the board in different parts of the world. Global companies are on the hook for multiple legislations in different jurisdictions that they have to deliver on. So they have to govern this stuff. So, I mean, one thing that I look at, I see all of these tools, there's still today, I'll ask it again, I asked it last year and the year before and the year before that, there's no industry standard to exchange metadata between tools, right? I mean, why not? I mean, do you not think that that vendors should get together and try and figure this out so that we can get the ability to govern across multiple tools in the enterprise? Because I mean, obviously you're not going to build connectors to every possible tool out there because it just would consume all your development dollars.
I think it's a couple of things, Mike. First, governance has been documentation. Policy definition without implementation is documentation. Documentation is instantly obsolete. So you have to enforce it. You have to have data quality checks where it makes sense to get a sense of trust. You have to link to the appropriate privacy policies and ensure that it's not just access to a warehouse, but to individual fields within a table that a persona can get access to. So you need data access management governance. We recognize this. That's why we recently acquired Privitar, also based out of London, to drive the enforcement of governance. From that standpoint, metadata is important, but enforcing through data management is equally important.
Right. But then do you think, given that we've got a distributed landscape, even if I do put my policies in a central place on the Informatica platform or Purview or whatever, I mean, do you think that that we'll see what we saw years ago? I mean, when we had client server and then we had lots of servers all over the place and nobody could manage them, and then vendors like Tivoli were born to do distributed systems management from a central place. I mean, do you think we're going to get to agent-based software and governance platforms sitting across all of this, trying to enforce from a common place?
I think there's a couple of things. One, I think the governance basically has a branding problem. Like, everybody loves to hate governance. We should start the anti-movement for love of governance to bring it back in some way. But I think companies just literally struggle with that branding as a problem. And I think more practically, maybe in theory it sounds great to have like one, central place with all the metadata and everything. But in reality, that is not the day-to-day that at least I see for curious if folks have other opinions, but that is not the burning issue of right now. The burning issue right now is, how do I make sure that I'm not sending the wrong data to a customer and exposing myself in GDPR or others? Mm-hmm. Or how do I migrate to a modern platform? Or how do I build a data product that's actually useful for my customers? Those are the right questions. And so I think in theory, folks want that sort of bird's eye view. But I think we're a little bit far from that. That's my hot take. Okay.
What about observability then? I mean, is that just a data ops function? I mean, you can, you start monitoring pipelines, but then you're now looking at monitoring data quality, which is clearly pushing into a governance space. I mean, are we now, given that everybody's now talking about active metadata and all this kind of thing, are we now looking at the world of taking data observability further to be able to automatically detect, things across a distributed landscape, to be able to automatically enforce governance policies? Do you see it going that way, or do you see it still just focused on the data quality in the data and engineering space?
100%. I think there's a number of different forces across data. First of all, data being democratized, being used by very many people in the organization. Second, being used in real time for real decision making and products. And third, actually a push to get data closer to engineering. And so microservices and all those concepts are more important. And so data observability is actually a totally new category that emerges in the last few years that's rethinking how we deliver trusted, reliable data. And that's in ways that are driven by machine learning and automation that are quite different for traditional data quality. And I think that has to do rooted with the idea that data teams should treat their data products with the same diligence that engineering teams are building their products and applications. Right. So very much see data observability go in that direction.
Right. So, but we've talked about data governance, but as we saw already, AI governance is all of a sudden here. We're about to see the European Union turn the AI Act into legislation with extraordinarily severe penalties. And the British government following suit, and no doubt the US, is cooking something as well around all of this. So what are you guys doing to govern AI or help your customers govern AI? Is this something that you're looking at? Because, I mean, even in data marketplaces now, we have machine learning models going in there that they're going to be shared. They have to be governed. What are you guys doing around this area?
We absolutely feel, at Databricks, we definitely feel that you have to have the governance model or the tool be able to support both. So if I look at things like Unity Catalog that feeds up into Informatica or into, I'll be nice to my partners on the other side here, right? If we think about Unity Catalog, it absolutely tracks ML models, notebooks, data assets, sort of all of that, and feeds into these other data management tools, because we do think you have to have the capability to track lineage, controls, policies, et cetera, against your AI assets the same as you do your data assets.
Well,
Okay.
I think honestly, governing AI goes a little bit beyond just the sorry to say that, just the data domain, right? So it spans across the applications as well, right? And it touches a lot of different things. So back in the days, Microsoft started the Responsible AI framework, right? So we have created that. We are battle testing that within our own environments as well. And it's not only the framework which kind of is a mental model, but the set of the tools and regulations we're using internally, right? However, the interesting thing is that that doesn't say that we should just drop all the other governance and just say, okay, AI governance is only the Responsible AI frameworks and associated tools, but we need to build on top of the normal and standard security and data security we have right now. Because otherwise we will see all sorts of the breaches, right? All sorts of the problems and all. So it's not only about, like, it's an overlay function on top of the data governance.
I mean, you can call it AI governance, you can call it data governance, you can call it data observability, you can call it data quality. It's metadata. It's metadata. It's operational metadata, it's business metadata, it's technical metadata, it's usage metadata. It's providing the necessary context and understanding of your data landscape. So the operational view gives you observability perspectives. The technical view gives you a sense of what your data is and how it's structured. The business is how it's consumed. All of it supports AI governance. All of it's, and it's metadata of AI models itself. It's also metadata describing what the AI model does, what applications it's used in, what business processes it supports. So it's very analogous.
But I've got to lock that in.
Governance.
I mean, I've got to know, well, what data was used to test and build this model, so that all of that's kept together so that I can see that and govern it.
Precisely why it's very adjacent. All the principles of data governance apply to AI governance. It's about explainability and transparency through context of what it's doing.
All right, so let's move on then to data architecture modernization, which has just been a huge topic over the last couple of years at Big Data London. I mean, one thing that I've noticed is that we've seen a big shift in the last 12 months from database vendors adopting support for open table formats. We've seen that with the announcement of Microsoft Fabric, for example, but obviously Delta Lake created the open table formats there. I mean, do you think this is, to me, is almost, you know, I've got proprietary table formats in databases, and now we have open table formats. So we have Iceberg, we have Hoodie, we have Delta Lake. I mean, do you see this is a changing point in you know, from a database or data perspective, now that we can have multiple engines updating these open table formats, so you're not just locked into a database? Does that mean that we're, you know, everybody will use open table formats and it'll just be a battle of the query engines? You know, and I mean, but obviously there's proprietary SQL on top of that, there's proprietary data types on top of that. But if we're all going to go, are we going to all use open table formats? Or is this just another thing?
Well, I think if I may just tap into that, right? From what I see and what we see as an evolution of data estate, right, and data technology, I definitely see that open data formats and open table formats are, well, let's say the future, right? The reason for that is very simple, is that in the good old days, or I don't know if you guys kind of have a different opinion, but in the good old days when we used to have a multiple, let's say, databases, right? And then we need to kind of create a joint view on that, right? We had to either create a new overlay or created data virtualization or anything of that sort. And that kind of creates a lot of additional data engineering work. It creates a lot of additional consumption and a lot of additional redundancies, right? While open formats eliminate that in the sense that virtually any engine can consume the data from the same tables, right? Let's say virtually, right? Technology details we'll put aside. But I think that's, at least for analytics, it's a future, A. And B, I don't think that, and we tested it out in multiple companies, I don't think that without open formats, data democratization or data mesh style systems will be possible at all. What do you guys think?
I'm all for everything being Delta, so.
So, you see,
I'm not surprised.
Support that.
I'm not surprised about that. But look, you know,
I'll just
we
add.
said that as
I'll just add that that's precisely why Informatica exists, because there will be a Delta Parquet, there will be an iceberg, there will be others, and that's the continued fragmentation that exists in the data landscape. Why? Because it's an immense area of innovation. So yes, there will be open formats, but there will be multiple open formats.
Well, yeah, because
you already mentioned two.
we said that of the SQL standard, and then everybody put their own extensions.
Their own
on it.
extensions.
So are you guys going to add all their own extensions to open table formats so no one else can look at your data? Are you all going to add your extensions so that no one can look at the open table formats except going through your engine as opposed to anybody else's, or are we going to get locked in again, or what?
Let's put let's park that question for a moment, right? So I don't want to disclose anything, so it's sorry for that.
Okay.
But the
well,
short answer is we're enabling
But-
all people.
But look,
right?
I mean,
And all
you know, we've seen the problems. Forgive me, but we've seen. I know from my own analyst calls, problems with data warehouses connecting to just cloud storage and whether it's Parquet files. You know, the I/O performance out of cloud storage wasn't good enough, and so open table formats have given us hidden partitioning and things like that, data skipping, allowing us to get data quicker out of these files. And so there's clearly a performance situation where, you know, for me, it's not about TPCH with big complex queries and showing those benchmarks. It's about the thousands of concurrent BI users hammering this stuff from BI tools. And now we're opening up generative AI, so you don't even have to figure out how to use a BI tool. You just type in a question, which tells me the number of concurrent BI users is going to skyrocket. So if that's the case, are these open table formats ready for like seriously scaled concurrent user prime time?
Well, look, that's the essence of the technology, right? That's why we have different technologies out there. So when we're talking about the open data formats, open table formats, we're mainly referring to the consumption side of things, right? And to the analytics side of things, in many cases, right? Not in all of them. You might disagree, there's a comment on that, right? But in my world, at least in the world where we design the complex systems, which are like very high throughput systems, right? There are some other technologies which kind of are more optimized to the specific workloads, right? Like say NoSQL databases, right? Which are taking thousands and tens of thousands or millions of requests per second. Or like Databricks is working
that's more
perfectly
for
with
transactional systems.
Kafka.
That's not really for analytics, though. It's more for transactional systems.
Well, let's be sure, or let's be very fair, right? Data is not only analytics, right? In fact, data is first transactions, and that's what generates revenue, not the analytics in reality, right? So in this sense, at least for me, right? In this sense, let's say data for open table formats are like very well suitable for the consumption, for analytical consumption, while as for the high throughput systems, we should take a closer look at each and every system, right? Some of them, they will definitely benefit from open table formats. Some will benefit from some other technologies out there. And you know, all of these technologies are available at Azure and Azure.
Okay.
Mike, you asked the question of why not a standard for metadata exchange. This is precisely why. There's bespoke technologies for databases, for data integration, for data management. They all are metadata driven in their own proprietary formats.
But there are standards out there. They're just being ignored. I mean, Agiri is just being ignored.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think it's a business decision by the vendors. It's not a It's not I mean, every customer wants it, but nobody's going to give it to them. So
My product managers get inbound on, that's great, you can ELT to BigQuery, but we want these extensions to BigQuery SQL for these purposes. That's part and parcel of the challenge of standards, is there's many metadata formats.
So many of them.
and the CDO of any organization wants a system of record of metadata. They don't care what format it's in, and we have taken the onerous task of interpreting it for them, whether it's in Power BI or whether it's in Tableau or whether it's in ADF or Glue or what have you, is providing structure to it because there isn't a standard.
And one more thing, it changed in time. All these products, all these standards, all these specifications, they're changing, they're evolving constantly. We cannot really, it's an impossible task. Look at this auditory and all the vendors presented, right? It's almost impossible to maintain the change management across the whole industry. It's just like too much of the task. Yeah.
But I think to your original question, I do think it then comes down to the innovation around the engine, right? At some point, the proprietary systems will all have some sort of capability around the open ecosystem, whether it's a connector, whether it's by default, et cetera. So I do think, to answer your question, I do think at that point it becomes competition for innovation around the engine. How do we minimize and optimize, like we were talking about early on in the conversation, based on delivering the best sort of technology and services that allow organizations to be optimized in their compute against those open ecosystems.
Okay, we've talked a lot about data. We talked a lot about data products, which was going to be my next focus, but we've only got less than 10 minutes left. Just a quick one-liner. There has been such a big thing going on about data products. We see a lot of people implementing. I'm involved in the EDM Council, and there's stuff going on in there about data products. I mean, do you see data marketplaces as the vehicle going forward in order to be able to govern sharing of data products around the enterprise, or even what I would call analytical products like machine learning models and AI apps and BI reports and everything? I mean, do you think it's just going to become the marketplace is the place where people are going to go for business-ready data, business-ready machine learning models?
Yes.
Yes.
That's why we pioneered the concept of a data marketplace. That's why we were the first to launch it, is because cataloging is great. It gives you a point of view of where your data is. Now, teams build data assets or data products. They have quality ascribed to them. They have standards of consumption ascribed to them. All of that can easily be published and browsed through an Amazon.com-like experience as the first level of democratizing data within an enterprise. So yes, very much so.
Okay.
With the appropriate governance being enforced.
All right.
But it also becomes a motivational engine, right? So the people who are and teams who are publishing their products via the marketplaces, it becomes for them the motivational engine. So more people can consume their product, right? And so on and so forth. The problem right now is that we don't have the data economics within the companies. So this motivation cannot be incentivized, right? So it will be just, let's say, political or influence motivation within the companies, not the economical motivation.
Okay, let's turn our attention to the future of AI, right? I mean, so as you know, this year is the year of generative AI. It's everywhere. It's in all over the exhibition floor. It's so let me ask you a question. I mean, given that we've got so many examples already of generative AI emerging into software, whether it's data engineering, catalogs, BI tools, data science workbenches, it's kind of going in everywhere. I mean, what impact do you think generative AI and AI automation is going to have on reshaping and redefining the use of data and analytics in the enterprise?
We see it primarily in two areas. The first is in, I don't want to say disrupting BI, but disrupting the way in which people who are less technical or don't know SQL actually interact with data, so ask questions about the data. And some of the most common use cases are actually sort of internal operations. So like JetBlue, a national airline in the United States, and other similar companies have sort of internal workflow operations and chatbots to ask questions about, about our own operations and being able to interface with that with natural language. Another example is supply chain, actually. And so if you can service information across, let's say, a company that tracks packages, if you can surface information about where the package is and where it's going and information about that, and bring all of that together into one place in a regular interface that a support agent can ask. So those are kind of like the most common use cases that we see today, meaning production use cases, but for internal teams to ask questions about data that they have internally. And then the second area that I think will get disrupted is the way in which data engineers will work. So you see this on the engineering side with Copilot, which has taken a lot of traction. I think the way in which we write SQL queries, the way in which data engineers actually create and operate data pipelines will get disrupted with generative AI. And I'm very excited about sort of the productivity gains and the improvements that data teams will see from both of those areas.
Okay.
I think it'll be a damn shame if Gen AI begins and ends with just chat. I think we're in the early innings. This is a massive secular trend, and our customers are trying to figure out what the killer use case is for them. We know what ours is. We're super excited about how we're leveraging generative AI to apply it to data management to radically simplify building of data products. Equally, organizations are going through their journeys, but early innings. There's so much more innovation happening in the space.
Right.
Yeah,
So
we're also looking at innovating internally in our own products, leveraging generative AI,
Right.
and then what are we giving customers that they can leverage? And I also see most use cases are those internal, boring use cases, right? Internal operations, employee handbooks, documentation, those type, knowledge management.
By the way, I think the number one reason why folks are starting internally is when I ask folks, like, why aren't you exposing this internally? Hallucinations and wrong data and sort of other issues are the things that folks are most sort of worried about. And so I think that's sort of the next frontier to solve, to build confidence. But agree that there's a lot more that we could do.
One anecdote I have. Once, recently, I was in a meeting with global CIO, Fortune Global 500 company, and there was CDAO, Chief Data Analytics Officer, sitting in the room. And we were demonstrating some of the Power BI features, right? And global CIO said to the CDO, "I don't need you anymore." You see? And one of these BI cases, it's definitely there. But generally, Gen AI changes the way how people interact with the software. We're moving to the interactive mode, which radically changes how the software is being built and how it's being used. And the funny thing is that most of our users, regular people, business users, they're getting used to that on a daily basis by using ChatGPT on their own, all these generative models. They're already using that, right? So the next thing, they're going to come to us and say why your applications are built differently comparing to what we're used to, right? So yeah, that radically changes generally the human-machine interaction, if you will.
Okay.
I often joke with my global head of user experience that we knew that the future of UX was going to be AI powered. It's amazing that AI power took UX to command line interfaces and prompts and text. It's a pretty remarkable innovation, but an amazing set of simplified experiences.
Absolutely. I think it'll broaden the use of technology right across the board.
And I think you also see that in titles. So on the topic of which titles are needed or not, so many sort of data leaders are now data and AI leaders. And I think that's also reflected in the modern tech stack. I think it's going to be the modern data and AI stack. It's going to be an enhanced stack versus something else.
All right, so we're pretty well at the end of the debate. Let me ask you one final question. I mean, you guys are the technologists. So what kind of advice would you give all the companies that are represented here, looking at all of this, where should they, be spending their time and effort over the next 12 months? Because the pace of technology is getting faster and faster. You're also aware of what you're working on in your own research labs that you haven't yet even opened up to the problems that you're working on in there. So what would you say that companies should be focusing on in the next 12 months?
Enable your people, I think, right? Like not thinking about the business, not just the technology teams, but think about the business users across the organization. How are you going to enable them? Because it's going to move faster than you can keep up with, and the technology will get better and better. And so if you don't help them keep up, they'll be left behind.
Okay.
Well, I think my general advice will be focus on the boring stuff, right? Start love data governance, right? Start love working with people, working with the business users specifically, right? And focus on what is preventing you from being more effective in the governance generally, right, across the board.
I like that. That's a good word, effective. Being more effective. I find all talk about being more efficient, but if you could be more effective, that could also be pretty powerful.
I'll build in that. I'd say sort of build strong foundations. If you have a really strong foundation to the team, you can run much faster, continue to innovate and accelerate, but that's very hard to do when the foundations are shaky.
I think we've got an enormous opportunity. Never let a good crisis go to waste. We're in London, so might as well invoke a Churchillism. Whether it's macro, whether it's soft landing, whether we're now going to have our next phase, now is the time to set foundations for the next 5 to 10 years. To do so, don't treat data and data management tactically. Don't build a stack. Guess what happens with stacks? They get high and then they topple over.
Right.
Build a modern data architecture. That's your foundation. Now's the time to do it so that you get lasting outcomes for the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, that's great advice. Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, I just like to thank you all for your contributions. And please join me in thanking the panel on the great data debate. Thank you very much.